Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of our Wise Words book summaries. Today we are going to be reviewing none other than Made to Stick by Chip and Dan Heath. This book really is amazing, so well written and so simply put that I actually found it pretty difficult to break down. Their book revolves around an acronym which they like to attribute to making things stick, and this is SUCCES. Simple, unexpected, concrete, credible, emotional, and stories. So Jes and I, we explored each one of these elements and really tried to flesh it out and bring our own knowledge to it. This book is amazing for anyone that's trying to express an idea, make it memorable, and really make it stick. If you enjoy it, do give us a like, a follow, subscribe, or let us know your thoughts in the comment section below. Without further ado, here's Made to Stick.
So, made to stick.
Made to stick.
Stick it in your brain. Sticky stuff. It's kind of gross, isn't it?
That's how we like to start off, they say.
Yeah. Start off with sticky stuff. Yeah, good stuff. It's not even that sticky, I don't think. But anyway. Yeah. In fact, on this topic quickly, I mean, you can delete this anyway, it doesn't matter. Have you read what's the other one you got? Learn something about sticking. And
Make it stick. I think. Cool. Yeah, because I was getting confused with that one the other day. I looked on my notes and I couldn't actually find any made to stick, and I was like, "Fucking hell, I swear."
I mean, to be honest, I haven't read this book in ages. I've just gone back through my notes, but so Made to Stick is a book by Chip and Dan Heath, who are actually two of my favorite authors. Actually, I don't know if you read any of their other stuff, but they always take super complicated ideas and then explain them obviously really simply. And I mean, to be honest, this whole book is literally about doing that, taking complicated ideas, explaining them in a way which resonates and people remember. I'm like, well, they've literally just applied this, whatever they've learned in this, to everything they do. I was obviously, they've got this, from what I've got here, I've got their whole sort of framework of success, which is the anagram for their framework, right? The simplicity, unexpected, etc. But I actually kind of wanted to start from the reverse, because this book's all about communicating ideas and making them stick, right? I wanted to start from the points I got at the very end. They had like an appendix. I don't know if you got it. And it was three barriers to strategic communication, because I thought it'd be a good place to start. So like, number one was cursor knowledge. Number two was decision paralysis, or brackets I got here, prioritization framework. And then three was a lack of common language. So I was going to start with the cursor knowledge, because I thought that was possibly the most interesting. Is something that we possibly or probably or even definitely do suffer from when it comes to explaining stuff. Because when you know something, when you're communicating with somebody, you always say stuff that you've obviously got the whole 100% view of. Yeah. So like, I was going to use Call of Duty as a bad example, but anything where you're communicating to somebody, like, for example, if it's your partner and they're like, "Oh, where's the spoon in the room?" You're like, "Oh, it's over there." And to you've already pictured where it is in your brain, but over there is such a broad, unless of course you're pointing at the same time, it's something that they're never going to quite get accurately, because it's not very specific, is it? And this is the point of the cursor knowledge. If you're explaining an idea without some tangible example, or something this person that you're explaining to can't grasp because they don't see it the way you do, then it's impossible for them to understand what you're saying almost. I don't know if you got any any notes on that.
Well, I think it is that we naturally assume that someone else has seen exactly what we've seen and experienced exactly what we've experienced, and we've obviously got a completely different past than someone else. So it's kind of our natural. It's like our default. But then what we need to try and do is kind of override that and think, okay, well, where are you in relation to this topic that I'm trying to explain? As in which
is almost why I'm teaching. Syllabus exists, right, in my head.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you have to start from the basics. It's like trying to teach, A-level maths when you're 5 years old.
But this is it. And it's there's a natural trajectory, okay? And some people just, depending on how much attention and time they've given to it, they might be further up that point. But what's interesting is like, it's kind of like the Hansel and Gretel. You've got to lead breadcrumbs along that way so that, you start at their level of understanding so that they can relate to that point. Mm-hmm. And then slowly you kind of lead them to your way of understanding something. And that is like, and then they can see it through your kind of lens.
Yeah, sure.
Because you've explained the way that you've come.
You've explained your sort of, your reasoning from the start.
Yeah.
Or you kind of ground yourself from the very beginning, which you can both sort of understand, and you build up this sort of this framework or knowledge.
Yeah.
I thought it was good to start with that as well, because also part 3, which is the lack of common language, which you could almost argue is part of the curse of knowledge. Like if we are talking about, for example, you're studying psychology, right? If you start reeling off maybe psychological theories or words that have no relevance to me because I've done no reading around it, it's very hard to explain something. So, I mean, a classic example I see a lot of is if you go onto like business websites and they'll have like this just unbelievable amount of jargon about, what they fucking do as a company. Like we create synergistic innovations in your company. It's like, what? No, like, what does that mean? And like, part of me is like, either they don't know what the shit they're talking about, or they just know themselves. They know these words in and out, but they have a different like understanding of these words to somebody else. Yeah. And it's like, maybe the alternative could be like, we help businesses innovate. Yeah. I mean, that's the example I just gave them, but do you know what I mean? There's a difference between like the common language that everybody uses. And it's like that classic Feynman quote, which is like, if you can't explain something simply, you don't know well enough. And it is that. If you can't explain something in really common language, then you're going to struggle to get your points across. Yeah,
and this is it. I think like a lot of people tend to almost bank on this idea of like intimidating others by sounding smart and using like big words that other people don't know. But the whole idea is that like, if you're in it for the right reasons, then you're trying to get someone else to understand your point, to understand your idea. And then the best way of that is kind of talking the same kind of language that someone else uses.
I have to say, you can never convince somebody if they don't understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
That's like, even when you're reading books, if you don't understand the word, you're not going to take in the point because you're missing like an integral part of a sentence. Yeah, that's interesting. One of the points he said is always address common understanding first to avoid the curse of knowledge. So you always got, like you said, I think you actually say this a lot, and it's like you always start from them, start at the point that they're at rather than where you're at in terms of if you're a teacher.
Yeah.
I remember you saying that a lot with the education sort of stuff. It's like you always start where the student is, because it's impossible to start anywhere else.
I think what's really interesting about that point that you brought up is, with Jordan Peterson's like point A to B.
Yeah.
You have to understand where someone's point A is.
Yeah.
Okay. You have to understand their idea and their like knowledge structure first.
Their position.
So that you can then it's like figuring out where Hansel and Gretel are in the fucking forest and then leading the breadcrumbs for them.
This is interestingly the whole I would almost say the whole A/B problem is like the whole reason why you can never give generic advice, really, or like, you can't really give advice to somebody unless you understand what advice they're looking for. If you got to get me, you can never do anything to anybody unless you can get that the position they're at with what they know, where they want to go. If you have to know that first,
Well, this is it, and I think like if you can, I think a way to get over that, right, is you simplify it down to below pretty much anybody's level. Okay, so you start from the very, very bottom, something that is so understandable by like 90%, 95% of people. Okay, because you like the problem is so I was having a chat on my research group the other day, and they're trying to stop attrition rates, so people dropping out of their studies. Okay,
interesting.
And it's like, well, how do you, like, this is all about Alzheimer's. And it's like, well, how do you make people interested in this subject? Like, technically, it should benefit everyone.
The research participants' attrition rate, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so, it's like, well, how do you make something important to someone? And I remember reading, what was it? How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Yeah.
And one of its first points was like, you have to kind of connect someone's goal or something important, like something that they deem important, to the thing that you want. So like, for instance, I think one of the examples in the book was if you're trying to get someone to stop smoking and they want to be a basketball player, you say, well, basketballers don't smoke, because they need their lungs, they need to be fit, that kind of thing. And so you make that connection, right? But it's quite hard to do that on such a general level because you you can't understand everyone's goals and everyone's kind of like important, like things that they deem important. So I think that's why you kind of have to have like.
It's even harder with old people because they
don't
have as many goals. I wouldn't have thought.
Well, and they've got a completely different context, like they're.
I assume they also have Alzheimer's, or is this more you're testing just the general population of old people for who has Alzheimer's, or are you talking specifically people who have Alzheimer's?
I haven't actually done the study, to be honest. I think that there's like a whole group. I don't think they're particularly picky when it comes to who they're choosing for participants. They're just trying to get a large sample of something. But coming back to the point, is in like. Yeah, you can't really make a generic. Well, you're never going to be able to please everyone. You're never going to be able to get across to everyone. But I think the more simple you make something below most people's understanding of something, then you can start there and work your way up.
Yeah, no, 100%. You need to, like you said, as simple as it needs to be.
Yeah.
And I do think personally that is, the whole maths thing that me and you've both had issues with in the past. I'm seriously convinced it's because lack of understanding of the fundamentals and the whole purpose of it.
Yeah.
Like, you see graphs and you don't understand why you're even doing the graphs in the first place, but I'm sure there's a good reason for it.
Yeah.
Do you get, if you kind of get what I mean, is that like, we're not even starting at the very basics of what the whole fucking purpose is. We're just starting at the purpose of like, we're starting, at the end. And it's like, what do you call it? I can't remember. It was a good book quote. It was something like, it's like trying to study DNA, or is it you start with the DNA, or was it start with the animal before the DNA? I can't remember. It was one of the two. But it's talking about like how you start at the end. You're starting in such complicated matter, and you're just not building up from like the ground up.
I find this so much with like psychology in terms of like statistical tests, right? Like I pretty much hate them because they're very abstract and they're quite hard to get your head around sometimes. But because like sometimes the way that they're explained, they're not really explained with a good enough example that's relatable. Okay. Yeah. And so I think you have to, if you think about it as in like someone who created this test, right? He's walking through fucking daily life and then he saw something and was like, oh, I wonder if I can compare that to that. And then he makes a test and then he goes further. And once you have that idea, right, and you give it attention, you start diving into it more, you start to see more and more of its complexity. Now, when you explain that, you don't start, like you said, at the end point. You have to start at the back, at the beginning point when you were like, well, this is how I saw it.
It's literally like, why I'm now like, I almost bought it yesterday, the Newton's book or whatever it's called, the Newton who created calculus basically.
Yeah.
Because I remember somebody tweeting it recently, I can't remember who it was, but it was like, you should read from the greats because when the greats became the greats, they were trying to explain their reasoning because to convince other people to believe in what they see, they have to tell you why they see it. Like, here's the start, here we're going. And then once that becomes set in stone, all the other people sort of build on it, right? And this is the problem with people who are like the curse of knowledge. They've built on all this fucking, like, all this work that went into creating this theory. And they just start here and they start building off it without, if you don't understand this bit, how are you expected to even understand why you're doing all this stuff up here?
Exactly. Exactly. And that's why like we've talked about this a lot, but like starting at the origins, kind of figuring out where this first problem arose, okay, and how people have built on it over time, and seeing that timeline or that epistemology, the way people have thought over and built on these things, because these things have been built on. It's silly to just start at the very end.
So So I guess like the main sort of, I'm going to try and wrap it back to like a takeaway. Like, it's this idea that, you should realize that you're coming from a place of knowledge if you're trying to explain an idea always. You're always coming from a place of knowing something. And then you have to try and understand what the person who you're speaking to knows before you dive in. And you have to try and explain it in the most simple terms.
Yeah.
And to be honest, that's what I got from the end, sort of the three barriers. I can't exactly remember what decision paralysis was, and I don't particularly want to, unless you have anything for it. But I was going to,
I can't really remember. I think, I think let's smash out the framework
because we can go step by step, and it's pretty. So my understanding was it was success. So SU is it a weird spelling of it? No, it's not. CCE, and then is it 2 S's or 1 S? I think it's 1 S.
Yeah, it's 1 S.
1 S, yeah. So it's simple, unexpected, concrete, credible, emotional, and stories. And that is the framework for sort of ideas that stick, or like, concepts that stick.
Yeah.
So let's just go through them bit by bit. So simplicity was the first one, or simple.
Yeah.
I think one of the main takeaways I got from this was, he talked about boiling down your message to its very core. So removing any fluff, like what is the point you're trying to make? And yeah, I like this. He actually talked about this idea that finding what the core isn't synonymous with communicating the core, which leads on to the unexpected of the next one. What do you say? Yeah, and another thing. Okay, yeah. So if you've got an idea, you need to break it down to the very core. And I think another interesting idea, which I see quite a lot of done wrong, it's saying three things instead of saying one thing. Because if you're trying to explain a concept and then you explain three different caveats to the concept, people are gonna be like, "Oh, fucking, that's way too much."
Well, this is it.
You need to explain it at its core with one point. Otherwise you're going to confuse the person.
Yeah, and you're going to overload them with information, and they're not going to be able to tell which one they're supposed to hold on to. If you give them one piece of information, the weight of that has their whole attention, rather than if you gave them 10 different things that have to split their attention into 10. It's like, and so they're really able to engage. And I think like something I got from this this chapter was, when you're explaining your core, you're explaining like your meaning or your value behind it. Okay, it's your origin point. So it's like you have to try and convey your intention behind it, because your intention shows which direction you're going in. If we relate this to like goal setting, like we talk about with Jordan Peterson quite a lot, when you have a goal, you look for all confirming evidence and you deflect any irrelevant information. Okay, so it's the same kind of thing here. That's like your intention. That's your direction. Once you can convey that, people can see what you're looking at. It's almost like you're giving them your lens of how you see this problem. And then you can start to, like you just said, then you can lead on to unexpected, concreteness, credible, all of those.
Yeah. Well, I think with the simplicity thing, it gives, like you said, it gives people focus, something to take away. Like there's always like a moral of the story. There's never usually morals of the story.
Yeah.
If you kind of get me, there's always one singular sort of point to be gained. I think on a side note to not just this simple being one message and just being the one and core message, there's another like side of simplicity which I got from it, which was using schemas in the sense of using things people already understand to explain other concepts, and which also can be thought of as also metaphorical. Like we talk about this quite a lot, like explaining the concept of love as a battle or as a journey or as a collaborative work of art, which I quite like that one. It's quite funny, quite cute. But what I mean is you use metaphors to explain complex subjects in a more simplified way, which not necessarily are like the exact accurate way of explaining something, but it gives people the ability to understand what you're trying to say, because it's explained in something they already understand, which is kind of back to what we were saying earlier about the starting where they are. And that's one of the easiest ways. Oh, what was it? There was a really interesting way of doing it. It was like, if you're pitching like a new idea, you can pitch it as something else, but with your twist. So for example, you're pitching a film idea. It's like Die Hard on a bus. I think that's one of the examples they used. Or you're pitching a new business. It's like Uber for cleaners. Yeah. It just makes it easy to understand, because people have already got that concept of what that thing is. And then you just compare it with like the small little twist that you have.
That makes a lot of sense, because when we talk about the kind of knowledge map, and you can't talk about astrophysics without them having an understanding of physics, right? But then if they have an understanding of physics, then you can relate their understanding of that to something else that you're trying to pitch.
Yeah. But that's why knowledge is cumulative in my head, because once you've got that bottom bit, this is back to curse knowledge. Once you've got that bit there, you don't need to think about it. It's all tightly in your brain, so you can pick up this more complex subject matter. But that's the point. If you can't remember where you came from, and if you can't link up that whole chain of like reasoning, you're not going to be able to like explain it to somebody, because it's just too hard. Like, I find it sometimes in books as well. If I've just bitten off the top, like I've jumped in the deep end and I've like picked up a sort of an investment book, but I don't understand financial statements. I'm like looking at all this stuff talking about like financial statement categories in the financial statement. And because I don't know financial statements at the back of my hand, I look at that and go, what the fuck does that mean?
Yeah.
And it's like knowledge is always cumulative in the sense of like you start from the fucking basics and you build it up to the point where you can read these things. Like, you know, what's another good example? I mean, I bought a really, really tough book. It was recommended by like Taleb and stuff, and this guy's like a mathematician, so it doesn't help. And it's like called nonlinear dynamics and chaos or something like that.
Oh god!
And fuck me, like I thought he made it out as if it was like the beginner's guide to, you know, nonlinear systems. Oh, that sounds fucking interesting. You open it up and it's just graph after graph after like it's called like bifurcations, it's like lines, and I'm like, and then that's basically what made me read the maths book. It's like, right, I'm gonna start from the very beginning. I'm gonna admit defeat here. I am not touching this shit. But like, you could waste so much of your time by trying to read stuff or trying to do stuff that is way above your pay grade.
Yeah.
Rather than just take the modest approach and go, you know what? Let's go back to the beginning. Let's go back to the simple. Let's try and understand things first, and then build up.
I think there's books that are very complex. You know, first of all, they can be read so many times, but then also
and
I find like,
get them. Yeah.
Well, this is it, and it's like if I'm reading a really complex book, at the beginning of it, I have to really like, I have to stop and I have to actually try to think how this applies to anything that I understand, because otherwise I'm just reading words on a page. There's no semantic meaning to any of it.
You'll catch yourself doing that, by the way, when you finish a page and you don't remember anything from that page. I've noticed myself do that. I finish a page and I'm like, what the fuck did I get for that page?
But then what I find interesting is like, once I make a link, right? Once I'm reading a page and then I'm like, fuck, I wonder how this applies to relationships or something like that. Then everything takes on a whole new meaning. Everything I've read and everything I'm going to read is now put with that lens. And what's interesting is like, whatever my schema of relationships and the associations that it has with that. So whatever else is linked with the relationships, which is loads of other associations, all of those things also come into it as well. So it's like, not only am I just reading this through the lens of relationships now, basically all the other associations to my idea of relationships is also being put on there. So then it's suddenly, I can start to read it way more, and I normally can actually speed up and start to understand a lot more and conjure up loads more ideas. But it's getting that initial point to try and search through all of your kind of knowledge structures and find something that really I love how the metaphor is always like called like when it clicks. I like that, because it is literally the feeling. It's like when something just switches and all of a sudden you get it, or it links to something you already know or you've seen, or you know. But this is the reason why you use, like, back in this point of simplicity, you use the schema somebody already gets, because the moment they already get it, it'll click. It'll be like, oh, we're trying to create a business that's Uber for this. It just, to them, people then go, okay, I know what Uber is, and now I know what that cleaning stuff is. Okay, an Uber for cleaners. Oh, that makes sense. I get it. And it's like, whereas if you started trying to explain like it was a freelance service where somebody comes into your house and mops your floors, instead of just saying the word cleaner, you could stretch out this massive explanation or something, or you could just like boil it down to the essentials. And that's kind of this back to the simplicity. Boil it down to the fucking essentials. It's Die Hard on a bus. It's Uber for cleaners. It's whatever. Exactly. It's whatever you want it to be. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I got from the simplicity point. I mean that's everything I got.
I think you can link the two together with the next one, because one of his points was making something simple isn't communicating the point you're trying to make. He talks about when it comes to making something stick, you need to make it unexpected. So what he means here is, even though you've got a simple idea, try and explain it in a counterintuitive way. So I was thinking about this before this call, how I would break a pattern. So he calls it like, so basically we're all predicting a small amount in the future. So if when somebody's listening to me speak, they're probably already predicting what I'm going to say next, right? And the way I was thinking about this is, when you're communicating a core idea, you should try and break somebody's prediction. So, for example, I was thinking, because obviously we were talking about books here, quite an interesting book title would be like, why reading more books makes you dumber. Because you would think, if you get what I mean, the pattern is you read more books, you get smarter. And that's what most people would deduce. The reason would deduce that. So think with your idea, as you're explaining it, what deductions would people be making? And how can you give them a counterintuitive ending to make them curious? So like, why reading 50 books a year will actually make you dumber? And then you could create a credible argument around the fact that taking in too much information could cause confusion, or you're too disparate, you're not really focused on anything because you're reading a bit about everything. Not that I would agree with that, but you could probably make a decent argument against or for that. Sorry.
I agree. I think like by breaking, like you can lead them in different ways, right? So like you could lead, I see it like magic trick, right? You're like showing them this hand and you're leading them on so that they're trying to predict what the end is going to be. And then bam, you suddenly break their like prediction. And then they have to suddenly like come to grips with it. And I think what's interesting is like, God, I relate to Jordan Peterson so much, but like, with the whole complexity problem, when you occur in when you have a problem, suddenly you see the complexity of everything. It's like, well, that problem's linked to this and this and this and this and this, and your whole world suddenly becomes complex. So people try to make sense of it, and they try to like link it all together again. Now, if you provide them with that thing to link it all together, you've basically supplanted your idea into their epistemology, into their schema, into their way of understanding something now. Because it's like you've opened it up and you put something inside their box and closed it again. And now they've got your little seed of thought.
That's why you need to, lead them to the water, but then don't let them drink it, kind of thing at the first. Because the whole point of like this idea of explaining something in a counterintuitive way is to like give them enough information to think they can guess what the future's going to be. And then break the future down for them, which will release that like level of curiosity, because they're like, fuck, I was thinking all this and you've all of a sudden said this. That doesn't fit where I want to, or where I was thinking about this. And then they obviously search or read whatever you have to say afterwards to try and reattach, maybe is the best way of putting it.
Yeah.
The counterintuitive idea to, the reasoning beforehand. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think he mentions that in post-dicting. So as in like,
that's it. Yeah.
Like afterwards you're like, oh fuck, that makes so much sense. Yeah, that like, oh, that's obvious. So I can see that now.
Yeah. I got for the post-dicting, mate, I've got 3 steps here. I've got the you identify the central message that you need to communicate, which is the first bit, like the simplicity. Then you've got to try and work out, is there anything that's counterintuitive about it or unexpected implications? And then communicate your message in a way that breaks the guessing machine. So this idea of like, like if you say reading too many books, people then immediately go, oh wow, they're going to be smarter, because then the guessing machine be wrong when you say, oh, it makes you dumber. And then help them rebuild it with your reasoning. Because think about that's what all these good books do, mate. Like if you really think about when we read, we're reading somebody's argument against something we thought was true, which isn't. So like they always say like this, like, oh, everybody believes this to be true. Everybody thinks this, but actually, if you look at this, it's not true. And that's what everybody's trying to do when they're trying to convince you. It's like, you follow this, everybody thinks this is true, but actually, if you consider this bit of evidence, that isn't true.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's interesting because there's you can break their prediction, but then you can also trigger an open loop with a question. So you're doing the same thing both times. You're either just like almost surprising them by breaking their prediction, or by asking them a question. Okay, because most people's like, a lot of people know a lot of stuff, but on a surface level. And as soon as you ask a question, you go into a deeper level. Now, if they don't know it to that degree, then suddenly they realize that there's a hole in their knowledge structure. Okay. And then once again, they've got this open loop. And because, our brain likes to save as much energy as possible. It likes everything connected. It doesn't like things broken. So it will find something to fit that gap. And once again, if you're providing them with an answer,
in a weird way, I was thinking that's why people's standards change over time. People who, expect something from life and then it doesn't happen, there's a gap, they have to fill it in. So what they do is they just reduce their standards. I've always thought that might be a level of it. Sorry, that's off kind of topic. Mate, all my rest of my notes are similar to what you were just saying, like this idea of having a gap in your knowledge, which is based upon this, unpredictable thing you just explaid. Pose questions, open situations. That's what you were saying.
I think the only other thing I had, was he talks about mystery, which I found quite interesting, as in like the idea of like mystery kind of keeps you on the edge of your seat. People are trying to guess and they're constantly trying to come up with like predictions and they're not quite getting there. And I think it kind of engages their kind of curiosity. So that once you provide them with this solution, idea, whatever, they're kind of more engaged, because it's like, you don't want to just give it to them straight away because they're just still, sitting at the back of their chair going, oh, okay. But if they're like really engaged and then like, oh, okay, fine.
I think another thing with the sort of, if you want to keep that idea a mystery, you should open Pandora's box a little bit more by, post-dictable. So you give them some sort of scenario where they didn't predict it, and then you help them build up the reasoning for why what you just said is true. And then you can leave them with like another question, which keeps them in then you could bring their attention to something else, which this new thing doesn't quite answer still. I mean, that's kind of where I'm at with all my books, if you kind of get me. I do it myself. Like I read a book and I'll be like, hang on a second, I've just read that about that, but that still leaves this question. And then that just leads you on to the next thing almost, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, I think that's quite interesting. Is like they haven't even had enough time to kind of, integrate it. And then you're also providing another thing that is like, but also this. And so it's like they're never fully like settled down and comfortable, that you're still kind of
you should never be, to be honest.
Exactly.
I'm trying to think what else, mate. Oh yeah, this one. So this is kind of what you just said as well, shifting from what information do I need to convey to what questions do I want my audience to ask. I think that's a good way of thinking about it too. Like it's a bit like what we were just saying then. It's like how can you get them to take away from you what you communicated? What questions should they be asking themselves post listening to you?
Yeah.
So obviously you should close some loops, but I'm not convinced you should, like, in the sense of you should answer the question that you seeked, or you should give them the information to close the gap that you've asked themselves in the first place, but then try and open them up to another sort of topic of interest, if that makes sense. So you give them the answer to what you've originally tried to communicate to them. So like you're trying to communicate a point, so you make it simple, you give them the unexpected sort of twist, you tell them why the unexpected twist is there, and then you leave them with another question being like, but hang on a second, what about this? And then, I'm actually coming more and more to the conclusion that you need people, a bit like the not non-violent, how to have impossible conversations. I'm so convinced that, because it's the same for me, you personally won't convince me of something, but if you can make me realize by asking me questions, I'm 10x more likely to come to your conclusion if you're questioning the things that you believe. You're questioning me to realize that I don't really know what I'm talking about. So then you give me information that contradicts what I'd like, or helps me reason from your level of information, because you're questioning me and you're like, what about this? If this was true, what do you think? It's a bit like this COVID stuff as well. It's like, what about this information? That's what you're not what you're saying to me, but you're sending me information, and I'm like, okay, and then I'm like looking into it. I'm like, oh, okay, that's interesting. It's interesting. I'm building up my own, like, do you get me? It's not like I mean, of course, I don't really know where I stand on it, but it's not like you're saying to me, oh, you should be this, Jess. It's just like, check this out.
Yeah,
just check it out.
This is it, and I think it's interesting because like, all you're trying to do is give someone a different lens of seeing something. That's all you're trying to do. You're not trying to convince them, because
look at it this way.
Time, exactly. Most of the time, you're never. It's not like you can talk to someone and then straight away you can change their whole way of thinking so that they agree with you. It's like, no, that's not how it works. That, like, and that's what the how to have impossible conversations is about. The idea that, like, okay, you get across your point, you instill a bit of doubt, they go across, and you've given them another way to see the world, and now they have their version and they've got your version. Now, if they go through life, if they go through life now and they start to see,
yours, the stuff you was pointing out to them,
exactly, and it starts to either overlap or like yours takes its place. This is it, because now there's like proper evidence, and I think like you can try and convey theory to so many people, but it's not until they put it to practice or they actually experience something until they can go like, okay, wow, because once like experience gives me it gives meaning, but it also gives like, I don't know, concreteness to it.
I can test. I've already told you the amount of time. I've already told you this quite a bit, haven't I? Like, I obviously studied business, and like the amount of, first of all, theories that don't actually match practice is mental. But then also, like, once you start doing, like, you're having your own business and you start reading around business, you get so much more out of the books than before, because they're actually, you can ground like your experience in what they're saying. So like, 100%. Like, I've always believed as well, that's why you just need, there's that like sort of idea that, you don't need to go to uni, you just need to experience life. I think you need both. You need to experience life and you need to be refining and reading and understanding, because the books help you understand the reality, and you should still be living life. You can't just sit in a room and just read books all day, which is what I would love to do if I had ultimate freedom. But at the same time, you need that, like, going around speaking to people, seeing the fucking world, like, to understand some of these concepts that you're learning.
That's what you need, theory and practice, and you've got 100%. To put them both together, because the thing is that theory is static, but everything keeps moving. Time keeps moving. Context constantly changes, and so that theory might not apply to the present moment. And and in addition to that is that you're an individual. You're different from me. The way that I conceive something and I conceive an experience may be different to how you conceive it. So if I try to explain something to you, and then you go and experience something, there may be some similarities, but there also might be an individual like take on it that you have. Everyone's going to have a slightly different experience, and not every theory is going to fit every kind of context, and you've got to take that into consideration. For sure. But it is the dual relationship between theory and practice. And then, you put theory to the test, and then you take that on board, and then you put that into theory and then practice. And it's just a cycle that goes on and on, really.
On that note, we'll move on from the unexpected, because that would be unexpected.
Exactly. Yeah.
I got the next one is concrete, right? So the notes I got, which makes complete sense. So it's the abstraction makes it harder to understand and remember an idea. So anything abstract demands some concrete foundation. I guess it's quite interesting as well, because he talks about this idea, which I've been thinking about quite a lot recently, which is like, so something that's easily visualized, like a noun like avocado, is much easier to remember than an abstract noun such as justice or personality. Yeah. And the point here being like, what's the best way to explain this? I'm kind of thinking aloud here as well, but the metaphor stuff. I find metaphors and similes much better at explaining these abstract things, because, I can't use a bloody metaphor to explain an avocado to you because you already know what it is. But when it's something that's hard to understand or abstract, or like not just one side to it, a bit like love, or like we talked about war, a journey, adventure, whatever. With that, because it's such a complicated abstract concept, these different metaphors highlight different aspects of it. And therefore, I guess the argument here is this idea of concreteness comes from using these things people understand. If that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. I think that, everything that we're trying to explain is experience, right? Any theory has been written down because it's been experienced, and experience is basically made up of our five senses. So those are the only things that we can relate to. We can't relate to, I don't know, a sixth sense. We can't relate to a fucking dolphin with like echolocation because we don't have it. Okay. Yeah. But the thing is that because experience is made up of our five senses, that is what is relatable. So when we start to know something deeper and we start to think more about it, it becomes more abstract, but it's not relatable. And like you were just saying, a metaphor, and like we were talking about this last week, as in like the different levels of abstractness or concreteness, is that you've got abstract, and then you use a metaphor to kind of point it in a direction and talk about what area of that abstract concept you're trying to talk about. And then you use an example.
Yeah. So, for example, if like love as war is highlighting the combative elements when you're in love, that you might have arguments, etc. Right?
Yeah. And then you use an example, because, like, once again, you know what an avocado is, but justice you don't, because it's not a tangible concept. But once you put justice into a context, into a story, like, how many stories do we understand?
Yeah, this is exactly what we spoke about last week. I remember it now. Yeah. There is that hierarchy, isn't it? It's the abstract term itself, like justice. Then there's the metaphor, like justice. I don't even have a metaphor for justice off the cuff, unfortunately. Yeah. There's something that can help explain an aspect of justice, and then you have an actual concrete example. So I guess another step into what concreteness is like when you're communicating an idea. So let's just say you were communicating about your business and you were talking about great customer service, right? You can use that as an abstract concept, because great customer service could be many things. But to make it more concrete is you give an exact example of how you expect a customer service representative to act. So like some of these great business books, or the only ones that sort of, get remembered, or, they communicate the point best to me. They don't just go like, do great customer service, because that's just a fucking platitude and everybody knows that. It's like, give me an example where, for example, maybe somebody's package got lost and the customer service agent like reordered the package and got it delivered to them the same day, or like picked up their package from somewhere and drove it to them. If you get me, that's a real life concrete example. And it's so much more memorable and easy to understand what good customer service is, without having the word.
Yeah, it's like I find abstraction really interesting, just from like I understand intelligence or or logic, basically like good depth of logic as the idea to be able to understand abstract concepts, because it's like it's what, you know, the whole is bigger than the parts. Do you know what I mean? So the parts are like concrete examples. They're the context, right? And then once you fit it all together, then it makes this understanding of what justice is. Then it like, you know, what we would consider justice or jealousy or love or whatever. And so it's so like relating this to like mental hooks, right? So associations. So if I understand what a car is and I know what a tire is, then they're linked together, you know, they're hooked together, and they kind of make this kind of web or net. And it's kind of just like you're creating more and more associations, and depending on the kind of connections, that's what it creates. Like it creates an abstract concept. It's too abstract to think about, but if you get what I mean.
You build up a load of ideas of what that term means, like, but this is also why, interestingly, with these abstract concepts in general, I think it has the most room for nuanced subjective opinions of what they mean to people.
Yeah.
So like, you know, an avocado is a fucking avocado and everybody knows what it is, but love is different to different people and their experience of that concept.
Yeah.
And so the more abstract a concept is, the more subjective people's recollections of it are. That makes any sense to you? Like, people's interpretations of justice for people who maybe got put on death row for years and then came out and found out they didn't murder anybody or something. Their idea of justice is a lot different to somebody who's, you know, never experienced the justice system, or maybe somebody who thinks that, you know, their son's killer got put away or got the death penalty or killed, and they felt that ultimate justice was served.
Yeah.
Like the abstraction, when there's room for maneuvering, allows people with different opinions on that subject. And that's why you get such a variety of people's opinions on these abstract things, such as justice, fairness, equality, inequality. Because also the problem with equality and inequality, the words, is they encompass so many different things. Like what equality and what metric are we measuring here? Because they can measure many. It's a term which can abstract across different categories. So it can be wealth. It can be like I sent you that thing earlier about the looks thing.
Yeah.
The difference between female males and the value they place on looks. You know, the inequality between. I was going to use wealth again, but I'm a mind blank here. But that's the point, isn't it? There's so much room in abstract concepts. There's so much room for maneuvering, or they're almost paradoxes, like in the sense that love can be brutal, but it can also be amazing.
Yeah. But then someone may not have even like experienced love in a brutal manner.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean? And that's what's so interesting. If you conceive that like our understanding of an abstract concept is a certain context, a bunch of associations all put together that create a context, and that creates an abstract concept. Okay, so then what's interesting is like everyone's experience is different. Okay, so then everyone's context is different, which means everyone's understanding of like what an abstract concept is, like justice, is going to be different. You know, and then it's interesting that like I guess the way you come to define something is that a lot of people agree on something, and then it gets written down in a book, and that's a definition for something, right? And that's the literal definition. But most people have a completely different understanding for what the actual literal meaning for something is.
I was about to say, can you remember that idea I had a while back where I was just like, you know, expertise is just refined categories. And the more I think about it, like, you know, the language gives rise to the concept that it perpetuates, like it says it. So, for example, the word love encompasses loads, right?
Yeah.
The more specific you look into like love and stuff, you can get more specific language with specific things that are happening. And therefore you can break down these abstract concepts into more specific layers, if that makes sense. So for example, the emotion of, we use the word love for a variety of emotions, which might not even be love, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Love is the overarching maybe feeling, or like, but there's specific areas of it that aren't love. It's like there can be anger involved in love. There can be this involved in love. And it's not specifically love at that point. It's just, we have that over encompassing. Do you kind of get me? There's specific levels within it.
But that's why I think what we were talking about in terms of like metaphors, right? How a metaphor kind of shines a different angle on that concept. So if you've got love, and the way that I see, like we talked about this last week, but the way I see an abstract concept is like a sphere. All right. And so depending on what kind of metaphor you use, it might shine a light on this bit or that bit, or if you describe it as like a wall, whatever. So different ones highlight different areas, and you can never talk about the whole at once.
Of course,
it's
almost impossible because it is because talking as a whole is just the term itself.
Exactly. And so, and then you use so once you like kind of highlighting an aspect of that concept, then you use an example to convey that and make it relatable to others. But even then, it's like you're still never going to be like, this is what I said to you a while back when I was like, you can never convey a feeling. Like you can never convey a feeling because the feeling is completely subjective.
Interesting. You can convey the scenario and how you felt.
Absolutely.
And then it becomes, that's an almost way of making something more concrete. You could be like, oh, I felt unfairly treated, but then you could explain the whole situation and then the person would feel it for themselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's how you make it.
But they would feel it in their own way of feeling it.
In their own way because of how,
God, it's just so...
God, it's complicated, isn't it? There's no such thing as, all this stuff. Anyway, we move on. Concreteness. So what's the best way to summarize it? Yeah, try and pick an example. Try and pick something that, the right metaphor could potentially be another way of thinking about it. Pick the right metaphor to explain the point you're trying to make, and then pick an example which then fully shows what you're trying to explain. Particularly, obviously, like a human example or a story or an experience. I think that's the best way of putting it. Then we have credible. Yeah. This was just, what I got out of it. Adding tangible and concrete details. So like using numbers, using data to support your idea. But I think also it wasn't just, backing up your points, but also at the same time, a bit like factfulness. It's not just, giving people numbers saying, oh, it's explaining, what the numbers mean. So it's not just being like, here's the bloody numbers. It's like, this is the increase. This means this. Yeah. And I thought, wait, was it this point? Actually, I think that might be unexpected. But it might have been unexpected. But I remember in this book, there was a really interesting point how they compared a specific number that they'd researched to something weird. I don't know if you remember this point, where they explained it's like explaining the deaths per year of shark attacks compared to something else. Or what else they do? Do you remember that?
Okay, I understand what you mean. Yeah.
Or they grabbed a statistic like, a human riding a bicycle is the fastest mammal on the planet, but a human running himself isn't. Do you know what I mean? It's explaining human speed in a way that's so interesting because it's drawing weird comparisons, but necessary comparisons in a way.
Yeah, this is kind of what I got, I think, in the first chapter, where you can compare things to you can create your own kind of metric.
Yeah.
So I think one of the examples was popcorn is 2.5 times as bad as a cheeseburger, or something like that. And so it's there's no real statistical element there, but it's just you're comparing it towards another kind of thing that you already know. And you can do this the same with contextualizing products, sign up for the cost of a coffee a month. You understand it.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect way of selling it. If I was ever going to sell a subscription service, if it was £5 a month, I'd be like, subscribe for this for the price of 2 coffees, and then you give the benefit, and then it's a beautiful sales hook. Because then you've, like you just said, you've contextualized it in a way that they can I already buy 2 coffees a month.
Yeah. Exactly. I buy a coffee a fucking day, so I understand it. And it's more relatable than sign up for this much a year, And the other day I had my research group, and once again, it was they were trying to come up with ideas to make people stop dropping out and make it seem more easier, or basically reduce the friction for them to do this test. And I put forward the point of exactly that one, the contextualize of the coffee, but then also the same thing with making something sound more pleasant in the terms of 3 months, sounds a lot than 12 weeks. Do you know what I mean? As in it's you're breaking it down to something smaller and more accessible.
You're changing the comparison set, or you're changing. You're basically picking a more favorable description of what it is you're doing. Because this is the thing, mate. So £5 is an abstraction in the sense that it can apply to multiple different products. There's a lot of things that £5 could purchase, and it's finding the correct one for the person you're comparing it to get it. Yeah, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but exactly, because I think it was supposed to take 35 minutes, which sounds fucking long. So you say like 7 lots of 5 minutes. Like,
or you'd be like 35 minutes, like just a bit longer than an EastEnders episode.
Yeah, exactly.
You get like if that makes because EastEnders are like an hour, aren't they? So like half an EastEnders episode. But like I'm just trying to pick a demographic, and that's also probably me being ageist, whatever you call it. I'd probably get cancelled for this shit. Mate, I'm not going to bring it up. I was going to say, have you heard that Manchester Uni they've banned the word mother or mum, and you have to call them folks or something now? Yeah.
Wait, what? Wait,
Manchester Uni have banned the use of Manchester Uni
of mum. What's wrong with mum?
Ban the word mum because it's gender unequal. Yeah, here we go. University of Manchester advises against using mother and father. Use the gender neutral terms as partner or guardian instead.
Oh my god. It's like, once again, it's just overlooking the intention every time. Just assuming that whenever someone says mum or dad, it's to, incur some fucking...
Yeah. It's
suppressing...
People are crazy, man.
Yeah, fucking...
People are actually crazy.
Anyway,
right,
back to credibility. So I just got adding weight to it by making it relatable to either someone that people look up to, or you could say a celebrity or something like that. Like, we would be much more likely to listen to something that was backed by Jordan Peterson.
That's a good point. I didn't even get that point out of it, but yeah, using authority, like making it more credible by adding the weight of a third person's opinion.
Well, this is it. And I think if you can see that it's benefited someone, or someone has benefited from using this or whatever, then they can see the actual progress, that there's there is potential with this idea or concept or whatever.
Yeah.
And so the problem is nowadays with Instagrams, you only see the finished not
even that, but you also get fake reviews, and you get people
I
mean, progress photos are the biggest bullshit thing ever. I could be ripped now and I could take a photo of myself, right, and then I could take a photo of myself a couple of years ago, be like, look at this 6-month transformation. As long as I don't look too obviously different, you get away with it. 1 second. Oh, mate, I quite like this actually from the credibility perspective. So you obviously, like you said, you have the authority. So you have somebody else putting their opinion on it, adding some credibility. You have data to support yourself, so any type of research done that can back up what you're trying to say. Another one I like this was asking your customers to test the claim you're making for themselves, and you call it a testable credential. So you test them to verify the claims you're making. So I think that's quite interesting for product sales. White teeth in 10 days, try it yourself, figure it out, see what happens. It's like a test. You might get one sale and it might not work, but at the same time, people love that sort of challenge, to play with the idea or play with what they're saying.
Well, because you wouldn't say it unless it's
see for yourself. Are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? Question.
Yeah.
That was it. I got it out. See, here we go. This is more the credibility. He said deer comparison to sharks was the excellent example of contextualizing statistics. And I think what he was talking about was comparing the amount of deaths caused by deers through road crashes to sharks. And then the prevalence of in the mind of everybody, how often, if somebody said to you, what kills more people, deers or sharks? You'd be like, sharks. And then it'd be like, no, actually it's a deer. But that's the point. It's contextualizing. So let's just say the point was counterintuitively, sharks don't kill that many people, whereas people think they do. And then they grab the statistic, 100 people died of sharks this year. Then they go, but guess what? 250 people died from deers. Yeah. And that's the point here. It's comparing something to add credibility once, because you've got the data already, but also to show that whatever you're thinking is just, but this is also what loads of people do now, which is right, COVID, this many people are dying. Compare it to obesity, compare it to heart disease, compare it to this. Why could be what? So and then it's look at the government's response to that. Look at the government's response to this. You decide. That's the position most people take.
Well, this is it. But isn't it interesting that first of all, you can prey on someone's ideas of something, or conceptualizations of something. So, for instance, a shark is we conceive as a really deadly creature because it's a predator. And, it's got sharp teeth, and it's been in a film where it's killed people. A deer's never been used to fucking kill someone in a film, pretty much. So you don't have those associations.
It's less believable, right? Because it's not a predator, but it's a byproduct. It's a consequence of running out on the road and getting run over and killing the driver, I guess. I think that's
No, that is it. And their bodies are incredibly dense, so they can cause a lot of damage. But it's nuts that the associations built to it that aren't necessarily true. It's fiction. Jaws is fiction, right? But it's so many of these things that builds up our understanding of something.
This is why a lot of wisdom's unlearning things, like unlearning first, associations that you have, like.
But it's going to the origins once again.
Yeah.
It's going back into your schema or your category and going back to the initial point and being like, okay, did I fuck up along this way?
Well, mate, this reminds me a lot of, I haven't read it in ages, but the Thinking Fast and Slow.
Yeah.
I think it's Thinking Fast and Slow, but he talks about base rate. So he's like, if somebody gives you a number, you always got to compare it to the base rate of something else. Like, I don't know if I'm butchering this here, but like, for example, it's a bit like the shark thing. So you think, this many people die by sharks a year. It's like, then contextualize it in comparison to other things to try and gain like an idea of actually how serious this thing is. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting because it links to factfulness as well, where he would
actually, I think it's factfulness. I'm getting base rates wrong here, but it's factfulness, that for sure. It's like compare the number to something else which is like, relevant to it to see if there's why you should care.
Because if you've got one example, you can't compare it, so you don't know its severity. So like 4.6 million people, 4.6 million babies died this year. That sounds fucking terrible. But if last year it was 10 million, then that's incredibly better, and it is really interesting. And so like we're always provided one example of something.
This would be a really, really fucking controversial thing to say, but it's like that girl who got taken recently, Sarah Evergrande, I think her name was, and obviously was brutally murdered, which was pretty sad. What my point here being, like, obviously there's a massive social media outrage, and that's completely warranted. But I would love to see the statistics of the amount of people who are taken from London streets and killed compared to like 10 years ago. Because in my head, there's been progress. Like, it's very easy to take this example and, get really upset about it. And that's like, as you should, and you should promote and obviously tell people to stop being weird or whatever the message is at the moment.
But that is realizing that, isn't it?
Yeah, it's just realizing that, this terrible atrocity did happen, but we've only seen one in like, I don't know how many years. Although I don't know my shit, there could be plenty of these behind the doors that aren't in the news, if you get me. Yeah, but if it's getting better, can we please, like, obviously promote the stuff, but stop. Like, it's almost like attacking people for like progression. Like, we are, I think, getting better as a society towards these things. Like, we're calling people out on social media for like bad sort of stuff like that, but it's like perspective, isn't it?
I remember Factfulness talking about that in terms of like, we forget what happened in the past. And I think he talked about like Sweden or something, and like the progress that occurred over the like last, the 20th century, and how like the older generation would be like would almost forget how bad it was in the past. And so aren't able to see how much it progressed over the last century. And we do that so much. We never really compare to something that happened, 10 years ago or longer. And so we just think that this is it. This is the start of it, this,
we don't have that long sort of memory, do we? It's like, or at least we don't care about 10 years ago. We don't really think about it. It's hard to see stuff you can't see also, because also what I mean by that is you can't see the stats because you're not impacted by it, but you can see the news stories and you are impacted by it. You're impacted by the social media hype around obviously Sarah going missing, and you're impacted by the horribleness of the whole sort of thing. But you are not impacted by the statistics showing that over time it's got better, because at the end of the day, statistics don't like throw your emotions into turmoil, but real life stories and things like that can obviously whack people off. It's just hard to care that like the death rate's gone down. Like, somebody said that to me, like, that's great. There's no emotional feedback from my system. But if, for example, you gave me an example of like a baby dying, in comparison to like the death rate, whatever, that's pretty emotionally tough. Like, it's a weird way of putting it, but that is just the way we work. It's almost impossible to get around.
That's kind of a good link into this next chapter, which is emotions.
It is actually, yeah.
And it is exactly that.
That's a very good link, actually, yeah.
We tend to relate to something, once again, to something that is more relatable. You can't conceive the idea of 10,000 people dying in an accident, but you can conceive, one person who went to college, who saved up, who did really good in their exams, and then unfortunately was like hit by a car, and that triggers all the emotions, and that makes you more empathetic. And they do this with charities. Like, that's why they talk about like, a child in, I don't know, in Nigeria that hasn't had water for weeks, or
so there was that fucking great quote about like something about stats and like you don't care about the numbers, but you care. I can't. It's going to piss me off. But there was a really great quote. Is that one, isn't it? It's like a quote about like, nobody cares about a number, but they care about obviously like the story behind the number. That's going to bother me.
The thing is when like numbers or truthful numbers and truthful statistics, that should do more good in dictating behavior. If one individual case, if a case study, like it's like with science, when you're reporting something, you don't use like a case study to get it across, because you're talking about one person out of like a whole group of people. If a whole group,
but you're trying to get like science is almost like, but you're trying to be empirical with science. You're trying to take like the whole and then just figure out what's going on. This is the quote: "A single death is a tragedy. A million deaths is a statistic." That's it, and it's a really good quote, and it literally is that, because you see the numbers a million and it doesn't even like budge anything in your emotions. It's such a big number, you can't comprehend it. You've never seen like that many. I've never even seen someone die. It's fine. An interesting way of maybe contextualizing that 1 million to make it a bit more, unnerving, maybe is the word, would be the size of the cemetery to include 1 million people in. Maybe like if you
could say the size of like a small country.
Yeah, no, that's what I mean. But like you give them something they can think about. Like 1 million dead bodies would fill a stadium. Like, oh my god, this sounds really dark. But do you know what I mean? That would be like a way more heart wrenching. It is dark, isn't it?
Yeah, but
exactly. A bit nicer. Exactly. Oh Jesus!
1 million flowers that filled up.
Yeah, that would fill up. Yeah.
But no, it is that it's giving more. Basically, it's giving more concrete detail to something so that they can understand it.
But at the same time, that's back to the credibility. But like with the emotion stuff, is actually going into the details of the situation to get the emotions flowing. I think another point here he has is like, what's in it for me? But I don't think self-interest is that emotional, maybe. But you try to talk about this idea of like, in the headlines, you should write something that's in it for them. Yeah, that's what I got from this chapter. I'll tell you a good thing I got as well from the notes, but I don't know how I got it in the emotion section. It's to do with semantic stretch. So, So when words are repeated or when associations to terms are drawn repeatedly, it dilutes the effect. So people misinterpret the original meaning, because I see this all the fucking time now. The more I think about it, like his example in the book was sportsmanship and how the concept evolved over time because of misuse. Because the way I think about learning language in general is you don't actually learn by definitions. You learn by hearing it in context, and then you slowly understand the meaning through where it's fit into sentences. So as people misuse words, they take on a whole new meaning to the original terms. So like this is what I mean when I say like business buzzwords are like innovation, synergy, all this, because it originally started off as a really cool concept, and like there was some weight behind the term of like innovator's dilemma and like innovation in companies. And now because people throw it out all the fucking time, it's become meaningless.
But he talks about that in terms of like it's like a cyclical journey. People use it gets overused because like one is more powerful than 100, but then once it starts to get used all the time, the value goes down, and then it kind of does like a cyclical journey where other words are used instead, and then they become used up, and so that one comes back and it's now valuable again. And you kind of see this with like just like casual language as well, how we speak to each other, or like people speak, like you end up adopting these terms that people used to use fucking ages ago.
And not even just that, you kind of invent your own terms with your friends as well, like the plums thing's quite funny. Instead of like bollocks, like you got two big plums. That's like a classic at the moment, but I quite like it because I feel like our language repertoire is always evolving by like the people around and obviously what you read as well, for sure. Like my language changes based on what I'm reading.
Absolutely.
The semantic stretch things is interesting as well, because what I also find is people try and avoid terms that have a bad rep. So another example would be the waste man has now become the garbage consult. Like that's not the exact example, but they've turned the word like somebody takes out the garbage into something less brutal. So like, instead of salesman, you're now a business development executive. Like what I mean is you're changing the names because basically the names got such bad connotations with it that you have to adapt it.
Yeah, because a salesman sounds sleazy.
Yeah, exactly. Well, they've already got so many bad connotations with salesman that you can't even use the term without, like I automatically I get weirded out as well when if I have a call and somebody's like, "Oh yeah, I'm the head of sales here." I'm like, fucking hell, he's a salesman. Like, what's he going to try and sell me now? Like, literally immediately. Whereas if he was like, oh yeah, I'm like, you know, he could have said anything but that, and I wouldn't have been on the guard, you know.
But it's funny how like so many of these words just accumulate these associations over time, depending on the experiences that we've had.
I think
like
popular media doesn't do any help, like with this, you know, like the very, very exaggerated archetypes in films.
But like you'll never be able to stop that. Like it's the same thing with like a shark, you know.
But that's how you comprehend things. You take it to the extreme. So you're like, oh, that's obviously that guy. That's obviously the salesman. That's obviously is a way of making it cognitively easier to understand who that person is, who his role is.
You always like default to the like extreme, because that's the most memorable.
And that's why you pick out extreme behavior when you're looking at people. You're sort of figuring out like if they're really sort of like over the top, you know, talking loads. You're like, okay, he's like, you're like, okay, he's a bit keen or something like that, you know.
Yeah, it's like Ben is a headhunter.
Okay, yeah.
But like when I talked to him, he did, like for ages he's just said that he worked in sales, and then I was like, oh, okay, like I just picture someone just like on the phone just doing sales constantly. But then like one day he was like, oh, well, no, I'm a headhunter, and it completely changed my idea of what he does. Like
what he does, yeah.
Because it's got a completely different meaning behind it.
Well, to you, and I guess once again that's an abstract term. These labels are abstractions for what you do day to day, right? That's what I think is more interesting. It's like you're a business development executive, so what does that mean? What do you do for your like day to day? I think that's a more interesting question. Don't give me a fucking label. What do you do every day? What do you do? What's the job? Yeah, like what activities are you doing repetitively?
Yeah. Back to emotions. The more I think another point that I picked up was he talks about using like certain pronouns that incorporate kind of audiences. So like you. So I'm talking to you, and you feel more in like integrated into what our conversation is. And the thing that I've noticed recently that my professor did it when he was like on the radio or something. Someone asked him a question and he answered the question. And then when he went on to continue talking about his presentation or whatever, he included it. So he integrated that question and that person's name into the talk. So it makes them feel more part of the talk, which I find is like a really good like tactic to do, because it's like, oh yeah, so when Jes asked me this question about this, then I, you know, and then you apply it to what you're actually talking about. You're kind of taking from the past. And
it's interesting you say that as well, because you know sometimes when you're like, oh, do you remember when you say this to me, or I say the same to you, and I'm like, oh, I mean, you've always said this to me. You've always said this to me. You are 10x more likely to be like, oh, hang on a second, what have I said to him? Yeah. Like, I genuinely feel the urge to be like, what have I said to him? Like, what's he got from what I've been saying? Like, it's weird, but it is true. It happens, and it makes sense.
It's such a habit of mine now where like if I talk about anything, I'll either reference a book or a person or a mate.
Or reference the person who's been speaking to you before. Like that's what we do quite well. It's like, oh, you said this to me, or this is... But I've noticed it, and it's interesting because it does actually keep you engaged more, because it's, you know, you then... I got the curiosity of like, oh shit, what's he remembered from what I've said?
Yeah, and also think about it, like the most sensitive word is our name.
True.
So like...
Yeah.
You know, if I mention your name, you're suddenly going to be like, oh.
Well, that's what he says in How to Win Friends as well, isn't it? It's, you know, there's no sweeter sound than the person's own name or something. Except for when they say my name, because they always say it wrong. Jessica. Is it just Jes? That's the classic.
Yeah, you literally.
It's just honestly, the amount of times I've heard that, Jesus. Right, we'll move on to the last one, I think, mate, because it's been long. Yeah. The last one was stories.
Our favourite.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, there's a few ones I got out of it. I mean, obviously, it's sort of self-explanatory, like using a story to explain, you know, before, middle, end. A story is great for explaining in terms of what Peterson likes to talk about it is in terms of, you know, point A, point B, and it's like a story is essentially an action and a result.
Yeah,
almost. So stories are the best way of explaining something because it's talking about a concrete example with somebody behaving in a certain way, something happens, there's a result from the behavior sort of thing. I think what I took from this was this idea of a springboard story. So like taking a common problem that somebody would have. So like, let's just say I was trying to communicate to you how to be a better business leader. I would use a story which shows the problems that maybe they're facing from asking them questions, and then shows how somebody's overcome that problem in the past to get them to remove their skepticism of like that they can't do it, and then get them to buy into this, the point I'm trying to make.
Yeah.
Like giving them a story where, things were going really wrong and, it was tough, but then they came out stronger for it. And that helped us get buy-in.
Absolutely. Like, I think it, once again, it just comes back to like relatableness. It's like everyone can conceive the idea of overcoming adversity, because everything you do could be turned into a story. I get up and I go and get a glass of water. I trip on the step. I get back up. I get a glass of water and I come back down. It's everyone can conceive the structure of a story, because everyone's had a beginning, middle, and end.
Arguably, there's no tension in that story. So that makes it really,
exactly, and
that's meaningless. But there's nothing to overcome or something, right? That's like the essence of a story. It's like the overcoming of an obstacle. Potentially is the best way of putting it. Because dropping your glass on the floor is not really, but it is technically still the same thing.
Technically,
you could write a story based on that, but it's not a very exciting narrative, because the narrative itself needs some level of like I said, like an obstacle which they overcome, or some level of like tension.
Well, that's why you explain a story with a good obstacle, because then it rivets people into like thinking, well, how are they going to overcome that? How are they going to get to point B?
That's why you set the scene though. Like you set the scene and you set the stakes, don't you? You set what matters to the person, what's good, like where they're at in their life potentially. And then you set the stakes by then giving, like, you create this like conflict that comes in, and it creates a rift between, their intentions of what they want, whether it's like, they still there, or they kill their dog like in John Wick's, and it's a straight on out bloody revenge film, which is just there to it's not really a story, is it? It's just a full on.
It's an excuse.
What's the word? I actually think that movie's based on this feeling of revenge, and how it, like, a lot of movies do these core drives where it creates a scenario where you really want to get revenge on the bad guys for killing that dog, and that's the whole movie. You just feel vengeful, and when he starts killing these guys, you're just like, oh yeah, this feels good.
It is an excuse to make an action film. That's what it is.
Much.
But it is. But once again, it is. Like, you could understand being upset if your dog that was given to you by your ex-dead wife.
Yeah.
I
mean, there's more. That's what I mean. Exactly. There is context. This is what I mean by like the setting the stage. It's like, it's his ex-dead wife's dog. It like means a lot to him. Like you get that. Do you get me? They build up this idea that it means something to him, and then they take it away. And that's why a glass of water's, maybe the glass of water was given by the ex-wife or the ex-dead wife, and then the glass of water meant something to him, and then he broke it and he's on the floor like, that's more of a story.
Or they made the glass on their honeymoon, it was engraved or something.
And then to make it even better, it was actually his childhood bully who comes in and knocks it out of his hand.
Yeah.
And there's a full-on revenge story.
We should write films.
It's just that simple.
There we go. It's that easy. But exactly. I think like turning your kind of pitch or something into a story, having structure to it. Like structure is able to give someone an understanding of what direction you're going into, or what direction you're like.
Well, it gives human action and like a concreteness, like as I said before, to the point you're trying to make. Like, I almost feel like if we're going to go back through this, because like in my head we should, it's like, make it simple, make it unexpected. What's the other C? So one of them is concrete. Make it sort of not abstract. There's an exact example, tangible. And the example can be the story, because then at least it gives somebody, like, you can see the action that somebody's taking. Because I mean, I guess especially if you're trying to make a point or like an idea, it has to be something people can grasp hold of. But then I'm also defeating myself as I'm saying this, because I'm like, well, you don't need a story to learn certain ideas, do you? Do you get me? Like,
no, I can read it. But I think this is kind of...
It's just a tool. Fine, it's a tool in a toolbox. It's not like you have to do every single criteria.
Yeah. There's different levels to it. Simple is, kind of like the crux. And then each one of these, preceding ones, they all like build on top of it.
I actually do think maybe the best way of putting this framework or framing this framework is it's not a checklist necessarily. Yeah. It's more tools. So like, one of the tools you can do is to make an idea stick better is make it simple. One of the tools you can do is make it unexpected, so they're more likely to read or, delve into what you're saying. Another tool is obviously make it more concrete so people can understand it better. Another tool is make it credible, reference the right people, use the right data, make the data interesting. Another tool is emotion, make it emotional, because not all things have to be emotional to be sticky, do they? Yeah. This is the point. Some can be. but they're usually sticky because they're emotional and they're a great story. If that makes sense. So it's almost like different pairings.
If you want something to be memorable, emotion is the most relatable thing, and it also gives semantic meaning to things. So like and that's the most memorable aspect of anything. So, you're going to make it more memorable and you're going to make it more sticky. That's basically the whole point of all these things, is that they're tools in which you can make something stick.
We'll make an idea that you're trying to tell somebody to stick better, or them to better understand it. And I don't know if I said that earlier about the anagrams. I did, didn't I? How, the success anagram itself was just a way of, an acronym, just making it easier to even remember this framework. Although the amount of times I've forgotten it during this conversation is mental. It's like, what was that C again? This shows I haven't read the book in a while, isn't it?
But it is a great book, and it's really simplistic. And half of my notes, I couldn't even simplify even more because it was just so simplified.
Yeah, exactly. And we're not giving we're actually not giving it as concretely as the book does. Like the book gives you loads of examples, and I would, if you're listening, I'd highly recommend reading it. And then move on to their other stuff. But I think that's a wrap, mate.
Yeah, that's a wrap.
That's a chili con carne wrap.
Well, hopefully that piqued your curiosity, guys. After all, that's why we're here. If you'd like to know more about this book, head on over to our website, wisewords.blog. And if you have a particular book in mind you think we should review, send us a DM to our Instagram at wisewordsblog. Until next time, guys, have a good one.